Ahora sí. Buenas tardes a todas y a todos. Bueno, nos vamos terminando de sentar, ¿verdad? Estamos ya al final de este congreso, en la conferencia de clausura. Y tenemos el honor, el placer de tener aquí con nosotros a Joao Costa. Bienvenido, Joao. Él es director de la Agencia Europea de Necesidades Educativas, Especiales y la Inclusión Educativa y exministro de Educación de Portugal. Su liderazgo ha sido fundamental en la promoción de políticas educativas inclusivas y en la mejora de los sistemas educativos para garantizar que todos los estudiantes, especialmente aquellos con necesidades especiales, tengan acceso a una educación de calidad. Joao Costa es conocido por su visión y compromiso con la educación inclusiva. Bajo su dirección, la Agencia Europea para las Necesidades Especiales y la Educación Inclusiva continúa avanzando en su misión de crear sistemas educativos que incluyan a todos los estudiantes, promoviendo la equidad y la accesibilidad a toda Europa. Su trabajo sigue inspirando a educadores y responsables políticos a nivel mundial a adoptar enfoques más inclusivos y equitativos en la educación. Pues, Joao, cuando quieras, te escuchamos. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, María Ángeles. Me van a perdonar, yo no hablo español, hablo portuñol. Sería una tragedia hacer esa ponencia en español, por eso voy a hablar en inglés. Thank you. La próxima vez intento el español. Well, first, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very honored also for your flexibility because I couldn't come yesterday. I could only come today. I'm in between travels, coming from Paris yesterday, going to Bratislava tomorrow. But it's a great pleasure to be here with you and to share a bit what we are doing at ISNI, the European Agency for Special Needs and Inclusive Education, and to discuss with you a bit not only the vision, what we want, but also to be very pragmatic about the challenges and about our recommendations to overcome these challenges. I sometimes have this title, that we have a collective ambition. Sometimes I have another title, which is that we have a collective journey. Inclusion is always a process. No country can say we are already done with inclusion, because every time we think that we have achieved something, it's just because we are not awake for some group, some person, some individuals that are not yet included. When we're talking about inclusion, we are talking about democracy. And it's very easy to say and to keep in mind that the history of inclusion and the history of democracy go hand in hand. And I always like to start with two small exercises. One is you could close your eyes for 2 seconds and imagine that when you open them, everyone in this room had my face. It would be horrible for obvious reasons, but most of all, that would not be normal. What is normal is that we are diverse. What is normal is that we are different. What is normal is that everyone in this room has his own specificities, his own needs, that they change. My needs today are not necessarily my needs tomorrow. So my first invitation is, why don't we stop talking about those students who are different? What would be strange if we would enter a classroom and say, I have some students who are the same? That would be the abnormality of the situations. I many times say, when I'm facing an auditorium like this, I'm short-sighted. So the only way in which I see everyone as looking the same is if I do this. Now you are all equal, but I cannot see anyone. You are all exactly the same in my eyes. So inclusion is about us putting on our glasses and paying attention to the individuals, to each face, to each needs, and stop the long, century-long tradition of defining education systems under a wrong assumption. And that wrong assumption is that when we enter a classroom, everyone is the same. What is normal is that we are different. The rule is diversity. And when I say that the history of inclusion is a bit the same as the history of diversity, is that sometimes to make inclusion happen, we just have to remember that what seemed impossible in the past, areas of exclusion in the past, are no longer conceived as even conceivable as areas of segregation. And if, of course, we have those cases of disabled citizens for whom it was said they will never have access, for instance, in sports, who could say 20 years ago that a citizen without one leg could be a champion of surf? And now we know. Together we joined efforts to have adapted sport and to realize that that guy over there is doing something that I would say 95% of this room would not be capable to do. So who has the disability? It's him or it's all of us? So let's think about normality. And let's go to even some more extreme cases. I'm Portuguese. The generation before mine, if you were left-handed like I am, you were forced to be corrected. There were resources and time used in the classrooms to force the left-handed people to write with the right hand. In a bookstore, now you cannot see it because the sign language is on top, but no problem. In a bookstore, I found this little book which is called The Prevention and Correction of Left-Handedness for Children. There were even books written about it. And why? And I remember still when I was a child, although I was not corrected, I once had heard on the street a very old lady saying, "You have a disability, you write with your left hand." And another one, very old lady, poor woman, started running away from me because I was possessed by the devil, because I wrote with my left hand. And now it just seems anecdotal, because someone sometimes said, it's normal. Left-handed are normal. And I'm using these anecdotal cases, or not so anecdotal, just to be in an inclusive mindset with all of you. The same with women voting. What were the arguments to say 1 century ago that women could not vote? They were exactly the same arguments that we use today to say that some children don't fit in the classroom. They are exactly the same arguments. As it was the same set of arguments to have segregated schools by ethnic or racial diversity in the south of the United States less than 1 century ago. The arguments were always the same. They are different, they are not capable, the system is not ready. Isn't it the same that we hear about inclusive education? So maybe it's time to say it is possible. And for it to be possible, we have to work on the possibility, like all those people worked on the possibility. Some because they just thought it's possible, others because they made sure that it was possible, and many others because they fought and demonstrated and spoke up for the value of democracy and for the value of inclusion. Let's start with some key principles. I know that in this room I don't need to talk about this, but nevertheless, it's always good to remember what we are talking when we're talking about inclusive education. And I like these graphics that we don't really see, but the big difficulty many times is distinguishing the concept of integration from the concept of inclusion. And many times when we integrate, we think that we are including, but we aren't. So our vision and the definition that we adopt of inclusive education is very simple. We are included when we are sharing the same space, the same learning opportunities, when children who are in some degree of vulnerability are in the same space, in the same classroom with their peers. And now we can see the difference between being integrated and being included. My best lesson about this I will share with you. Maybe some of you already heard me telling this story. When I was in the ministry, in the government, in the Ministry of Education, in Portugal, we have one activity once a year. We simulate in the schools an earthquake so that the children and the youngsters learn the safety rules in the event of an earthquake. And I visited one school for this activity, a primary school and elementary school, and there were 2 classrooms with a child, second grade, so 7-year-olds. It was just a coincidence. In 2 classrooms, there was a child in a wheelchair. What happened in one of the classes? So at first sight, you'd say, this is a very inclusive school. The children with wheelchairs are in the classrooms. In one of the classes, when the bell rang, it was the sign for the earthquake, there was an adult that turned the wheelchair, and this child was watching the others perform the safety rules. In the other class, there was no extra adult, and this is a wake-up call about resources, but there was one other child that when the bell rang, ran, grabbed his friend from the wheelchair, took him under the desk, and protected him. This one was included, the other one was integrated. And the beautiful message of this little story that I had the joy of witnessing was that this activity was not only good for the excluded child, it was also good for their peers, because they all developed a sense of solidarity, a sense of responsibility for the collective life of the whole class. So this is a journey. You do not get to inclusion if you don't start integrating first. But sometimes we still go to schools and we ask, where is inclusive education here? And you can have an answer like, it's the second corridor on the right. That's where the room for disability is. That's integration. That's not inclusion. And I really like to talk about this concept so that we are on the same page when we're talking about inclusive education. Another dimension, and I will come back to this, is that for many years we have thought, because it was a first step, that inclusion was about access, making sure that the learners access mainstream education. But if we only talk about access, and in the panel I was in the morning, this was mentioned by the law people, it was very interesting to hear them. If we only talk about access, we are not doing the whole thing. It's about staying, it's about learning, it's about achievement opportunities, and very key, it's about belonging there. And I will come back to these notions of participation and belongingness. So what I will do in these 45 minutes with you is first to step a bit back from inclusive education, to give you a bit of context on the global debates that we are having on education these days. I'm currently also president of the Education Policy Committee at the OECD, and it's interesting to know what are the debates when we sit with many countries from many different geographies. We are all struggling with the same problems. Then go back to these key concepts and principles, talk about curriculum, citizenship education, and then go on the challenges and recommendations that we have. So if the world is with me, I will have time for all of this, otherwise I will see what I can do. So in these global discussions that we are having, we have adopted this acronym, VUCA, that we are educating in a world of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. None of this is news, but the speed at which this is happening is gigantic these days. And this creates lots of difficulties for the education system. Education, and here in the academy, we know how do we like to think of education. We like to plan for 10 years, then we monitor, then we evaluate, but the world is not being a good partner in this time for monitoring, implementation, evaluation. And the best example we have is in 2020, 5 years ago, we were all so certain about education design, and then an invisible virus came and transformed the whole of education in 2 weeks. And all of a sudden, we knew nothing. And we have, unfortunately, a big part of the world. Children have to learn in context of war and conflict. I was in Ukraine 2 years ago, and I visited schools that are where education is happening in bunkers. And children have to learn. They cannot wait for the end of the war to be able to be educated. Climate change is affecting schools and education all over the world. And of course, all the digital transformation that is affecting education. And I will not for sure have time to go on the details, but the digitalization can be a tool for inclusion, or it can be the source of bigger divides and areas of exclusion. So it's really a topic that we have to go deeper into. All of this has impacts. It has impact on the infrastructures. It's impossible these days to build a school in which Wi-Fi is not available, in which an IT technician doesn't know. There are new areas of security in school. We know that cyberbullying is growing in the schools, and this is a barrier to inclusion. We know that I was in a panel last year in Japan, and I had a school principal from the United States telling me that one day there were 2 drones flying over the school. And in 2 hours, the faces of the children of that school were in pornography websites. This was impossible many years ago. So there are infrastructural impacts. There are curriculum design impacts. I will go more about this. We cannot talk about inclusion without talking about human resources. If we want everyone in the school, we need to know what are the teams that we need in the school to work with all children. And of course, monitoring, assessing in this speedy world becomes more difficult, but we have to keep doing it. When we bring together all the policymakers in these global forums and we ask them to do the priorities in terms of needs right now at the policy level design, we see many questions that appear as recurring. I will just mention a few. I already talked a bit about digitalization, but for instance, there is a bigger quest for us to demonstrate the socioeconomic benefits of education. Education is being devalued a bit in the world and in the world policies. This relates also with the financing models. The issue of cost efficiency is becoming a hot topic because unfortunately there is, for instance, here in Europe, there is more money going to security, to defense, and we know that the money doesn't grow in trees, so we need to know what works, where investment is really effective. We have, and I will go a bit into this to showing you some data, we now know that cognitive achievement is not everything, that well-being, psychological well-being, is not only a prerequisite to learn, but it's also a goal of learning. And we also need to know better, and this is very relevant for inclusion, about how humans learn. So we need to bridge with the neurosciences. The kids that are entering school today were born in a world completely different from ours. They are in a world of hyperstimulation. We are a bit like that. I'm sure many of you are paying attention to me, but you're looking at your phone at the same time and looking at the PowerPoint and maybe paying attention to the sign language a bit, because those who don't speak sign language are curious about some gestures, and we are okay. But the little children were born like this, and this has an impact on how we learn, and therefore it has an impact on the teaching methodologies. I will want to discuss inclusive education alongside with two other pillars. Academic achievement, what we mean with the word success. It's so much used in the political speech. We want students to thrive, to have success. But many times we just make of this word success a statistic. If we have 90% approval or good marks, we say there is success. But what if the students had good marks and they didn't learn anything? Are they still successful? So I will go a bit into this word. Of course, inclusion, and I will spend some time on citizenship education. It's very interesting that in those places, and in these, and I have to talk a bit about politics as well, in those political groups that attack inclusive policies, they also attack citizenship education in the curriculum. Why? Why? And I can bring some of the most heated debates on citizenship education. Why don't they like gender equality in the curriculum? Because that's the space we have in the schools to say that a child that suffers homophobic bullying has the right to participate. But bullying is an area of exclusion. So the two things go hand in hand. They go together. That child that grabbed his friend from the wheelchair was developing citizenship skills. That lesson was a class of citizenship education. So what are we talking when we talk about success? What I bring here, and there are many, many countries doing different things, is what we did in Portugal 8 years ago. We designed a student profile, what we expect from that students achieve. And I wasn't concerned about grade repetition rates. I wasn't concerned about marks. I was concerned about the competencies they have to develop. I'm just going to single some of them. Of course, we want students to learn things, to learn facts, to know things. But we also want them to go deeper than that. We need students to develop critical thinking. Why? Because we are being invaded with fake news, misinformation. We have to know how to evaluate what appears in front of us when we open whatever social media we use. We also want them to be creative. We have this clash. If you think of, if I would ask my grandmother, who's no longer with us, what is a good student? And sometimes we ask younger people than my grandmother, what is a good student? And this classical representation of a good student is someone who is very quiet in class, that is very good at repeating what the teacher said, and is very competitive. He has to be the number one in class. Now, when we look at adult life, is this what we want from citizens? No. We want citizens who are able to work in teams together with others, so they are not trying to be the number one. We want people that are able to face new problems and solve them. So they have to be critical, creative. They are not good at repetition. Actually, with the advances of technology, the repetitive works are the ones in which the technology will replace humans. So if we train students just for repetition, we are training them right now for unemployment in the future. And they are not quiet. They are active citizens. They speak. They communicate. They participate. So there is this clash. And curriculum reforms in many countries are trying to solve this clash. I only like to single, it's not the topic of this, but I cannot help doing it, this component here on aesthetic and artistic sensitivity. I'm a linguist by training. There are two things that make us uniquely human. One is language, the other one is art. So if we leave the arts out of school, out of education, or if we take the arts as a side dish, we are not forming humans, we are forming machines. And you know in this room how the arts are one of the most precious tools for inclusion. Many students feel happy in their school or feel that they are capable in their school in an artistic experience before they manage to do so in the mathematics class. So the arts are a very important tool for opening our minds, for democracy, but also for inclusion. So I come back to these two topics, belongingness and well-being. When we are talking about inclusion, or let me put it this way, when we are talking about exclusion, we are all the time talking about those learners that don't feel they belong in the community. We are talking about those learners that don't feel well in school. And we have to give them a voice. We have to build policies with them, because many times we design policies without them. So we never ask, and by policies I mean at the state level, but also at school level and classroom level. We forget to ask them why they are not feeling well. And we design our policies irrespectively of their needs. Let me give you some data, and this comes from OECD. These are a couple of slides that I borrowed from Andreas Schleicher, the Director of Education of OECD. And this comes from last year's Education at a Glance, and it's about the relation between inclusion, education, and democracy. I'd like you to focus on the right-hand side of the graphic. You cannot see it again. What it shows is the following. There are positive correlations between levels of education and qualification and citizenship participation in adult life. And I give you just two examples. The more educated you are, the less you believe in conspiracy theories. It's more or less obvious. But this shows how much education affects the quality of democracies. The more educated you are, the less, there's also statistics on this, the less you embark in polarization speeches. Now imagine all those citizens that are left out of education. If we can educate them, we'll have more engaging adults in the future. Another piece of data, this comes from PISA. And PISA and OECD, I discuss it there, it goes by fashion. It's a fashionable thing. So for many years it was Finland, and everyone went to Finland to see what Finland was doing. Then Portugal was famous for some time because we went up very, very rapidly and we aligned with the average and we are still there. Now everyone is looking at the Asian countries. And you have Singapore. Singapore is a top-performing country. But PISA has 4 volumes. The newspapers only show 1 page. And when we look at other data from Singapore, psychological well-being, the second bar, look where they are. And we know the reports about school anxiety, about suicidal ideation in the youngsters in some of these countries. So there's a moment in which I think, do I want the learners to be like this? So let's look at another country. Let's look at Albania. Albania is one of the worst performing countries. But look at this, they are happy. So then we get to a stage of, do I have to choose? Either I'm happy or I know mathematics. Fortunately, no. And we have here an example from Denmark, a country that does very well in the two dimensions. Of course, it has to do also with other external factors, socioeconomic conditions of the countries, but we know where we want to go. Another, I talked about creativity, and just showing you this graph also from the well-being study of OECD, one thing that we have to be mindful of. Creativity is a key competence for the future. Creativity is a tool for inclusion, but creativity levels decrease during schooling. From preschool to upper secondary, 15-year-olds report less creativity than 10-year-olds. This is just to flag something that will be needed I will skip that one later in the conversation. Now, let's focus now on inclusive education. And I would like first to share with you in ISNI, in the agency, when we work with the countries and for the countries, what are the principles and the characteristics of models of inclusive education? So where do we want to go? First, we have systems that invest more on prevention. Inclusive models are preventative in nature. They are not compensatory, they are not about remediation. The earlier we act, the best are the results we get. Second, they are educational models. They are not clinical models. What this means is that we don't need referencing. We don't need a student to come with a label and then apply standardized measures to that student. Because if I am in the autism spectrum, I can be completely different from my colleague who is also in the autism spectrum. Or because intersectionality is the rule. I can have a syndrome and be an immigrant who doesn't speak the language. Or I can have no syndrome, but suffering from bullying in my school. So what this means is that we have to look at the specific educational needs of all learners rather than standardizing measures according to some clinical diagnosis. Of course, the clinical diagnosis, if it exists, it's also taken into consideration. But if we standardize measures according to models of clinicians, we are not responding to educational needs. Inclusive education models are multi-level. We work with universal measures for all students, and we get more and more specific according to the specific needs of each learner. It's a multidisciplinary work. I will come back to this. And this is something that countries have to invest on, to have multidisciplinary teams in the schools, but above all, to have the sectors collaborate. I will come back to this in a minute. And this relates to this commitment to partnerships. Many times schools feel that they have to solve all the problems in the world. But the problems, most of them, come from outside school. So if the other sectors are not engaged, schools, teachers are not magical creatures that will solve everything. One very important dimension, I already touched on this before, is the whole school approach. If the school library is not inclusive, if the mathematics teacher is not inclusive, if the accessibility is not a shared responsibility by all the school, more importantly, if the school principal, if the school leader is not inclusive, if the project of the school is not inclusive, there will be no inclusion in that school. And I will not have time to talk about this, but transitions are a key area for exploring. Many times in many countries, everything is more or less well while you are in school, but when you are 18 and you have to go for after school, university, work, things fail. And so this is an area that requires investment. So just to make very clear what our position here is, at the heart of education systems, inclusive education systems, we are talking about prevention, and our ultimate vision is that we are talking about all learners, and all means all. All means that we are talking about disability and non-disability, about immigrant and non-immigrant, about different sexual orientations and normative sexual orientations. It's about all. And this has a very big impact on how we define quality education systems. I say all the time, when there's one thing, I think in Spain you have the same, I hate school rankings that appear in the newspapers. I hate them so much because they are an enemy of inclusion. I don't care if a school, normally it's private schools, appear as #1 in the ranking if they select students at the entrance and if they get rid of the students with more difficulties. I value much more the work of those schools in very poor neighborhoods with lots of social problems, and they still manage that those students learn. They may not achieve the best marks in the world, but they stay in the system and they learn. And they develop socio-emotional skills. Those are the quality schools. Those are the quality teachers. And what I'm saying is, if a school is not inclusive, then it has no quality. That's our vision. A message that sometimes we have to convey to everyone, and I know that in many countries there is a bit of a pushback on inclusive education, also due to parental pressure and some very active movements, is that inclusive education is good for everyone. It's good for the learners, they learn more, they develop social skills, they develop well-being. It's also good for their peers, they are more empathic, they collaborate, they build an inclusive mindset, and having been a Minister of Education, my advice to any of you that wants to be a Minister of Education is try to be part of a government without a Minister of Finances, because it's difficult. But we also know, and we also have evidence on this, that even in terms of cost efficiency, it's better to have inclusion than segregated schools. And this is something that we can demonstrate with data. So it's better for the learners, it's better even for the finances of the countries. Let me go through some challenges and then our recommendations. Luckily, we have more recommendations than challenges. And what I'm going to do in this second part is to share with you the following. It's not easy, but it's easier to talk about the values and the principles than to make it happen. So where we all struggle is in the implementation. So it's very important that we are aware of the major challenges for implementation so that we can then ask on the pathways for effective implementation. And I will refer 4 main challenges. We know that there are problems with data and that there are things going on. I will focus on Europe now. There is a decline in academic performance in the EU. Part of it is related to the pandemic. Another part comes from before the pandemic. We know that early school dropout is growing in some countries. So there is data that is worrying us. We know that this correlates very strongly with well-being, mental health, belongingness. So if we go back to the key principles, it relates to inclusive education. We have a problem of teacher shortage almost everywhere in Europe. And we also have sometimes difficulty in monitoring because the reference to special education needs, the definition is very different in different countries. The assessment procedures are different. The financing mechanisms are different. So when we are trying to get a picture of what is going on, and which is critical for the monitoring, sometimes this is difficult. So there are challenges related to monitoring and assessment. So the 4 challenges I'd like to highlight. One is about training and retaining teachers. And the relation with academics is very, very important. We know that there is a crisis of teacher attraction all over the world. But we know also, and this is different in different countries, sometimes it's, they don't want to become teachers, but in many countries it's about retaining them. There's very high percentages of abandoning the profession after 5 years in some countries. And those are the interesting ones, to ask them, why do you want to leave? And we know that teachers report, the Thalys report just came out, teachers report that they don't feel prepared to cope with diversity, with multiculturalism. Now, this means that we have to invest more on initial teacher preparation and in professional development. I sometimes make this analogy, and I've trained teachers for more than 20 years at my university, and I'm now aware that if I would go back, maybe I would do things differently. How do we train teachers in most of the world? We train teachers for the only students they will never find. Or to the average student, is the average of all the ones, the real ones that are sitting, or for an ideal student. What is this is as if we were training medical doctors to get to a hospital and only finding healthy people. It will not work. Not only it doesn't work, but it leads to frustration. Teachers feel frustrated because they didn't receive the tools to cope with diversity. So there's a big wake-up call to the universities and the teaching schools on how we are preparing teachers. Also, we cannot forget that we are living in a context of polarization. Inclusive education requires a social consensus on the good of including everyone. Inclusive education is about a model of society in which everyone belongs. So when we see and we hear this very unfortunate anti-immigration speech is growing everywhere in many countries, this is about a model of society that's saying there's a part of the population that doesn't belong, that doesn't fit here, that doesn't have the right to be here. And this is like a new virus because it contaminates and it gets everywhere. It gets to the classroom. It starts with the immigrants. The next day is about a sexual minority. The next day is about disability. And the next day is about us. But we didn't pay enough attention at the beginning. We know that this polarization is fed by perceptions. What can we do? How can we fight perceptions? With evidence, with data. So that's what we have to provide to the public space. That's where the universities play a big role. Respond with data, respond with evidence, to tell the people your perception is misled. You're not the one to blame, but you were given fake information, many times fake news. Then finances and resources. I just would like what you have on the right-hand side of this pyramid is the multi-level approach that you know very well. The universal design for learning that you know. Start with universal measures, get more specific till the top of the pyramid. On the left-hand side, you have what many times doesn't work. Because we don't invest enough on prevention, the pyramid is reversed in terms of resource allocation. And we end up spending much more money at the top of the pyramid because we didn't invest enough at the bottom of the pyramid. And this is something, it's very difficult to discuss with ministers of finances, but this is something that we have to insist on. Then I already mentioned this, so I will not go in great detail, but collecting data is difficult, and we need data. Many times we collect data on little silos, We collect data about exclusion in multiculturalism, about exclusion in disability, and we lose the whole picture. And it's very difficult to develop policies when we have a good data collection model. And also, there's a tension. Teachers everywhere in the world complain that they are overwhelmed with bureaucracy, but sometimes we need a bit of bureaucracy in order to have data. So this tension, this is actually an area in which I believe that artificial intelligence will be helping us, because it will alleviate administrative tasks that are done. In the agency now, we don't write minutes of meetings. We have an AI tool following up our conversations, and then at the end of the meeting, we have the minutes. We just have to review them. We save so much time. So there's more to come here. So some recommendations to bridge this gap between policy and practice. The first one is, let's think in an integrated manner. If we say, here's the inclusive education people, here's the other teachers, we will not be able to achieve anything. So our first recommendation is that we work on single legislative frameworks. This is in our activities together with the countries. In the country support, we are designing an activity with the Spain ministry now, and we want to try to support Spain in this, maybe even go back a bit to restart some documentation that already exists. I will just give 2 examples. If we want an inclusive system, but we don't prepare the teachers for this, it will fail. If we develop the curriculum, and then we develop a separate legislation for inclusion, we have already designed a curriculum that is not inclusive. For instance, flexibility and autonomy for teachers are key dimensions for curriculum development for it to be inclusive. The way we assess and evaluate students. If everything is standardized, it will fail. Once a neighbor of mine, a 12-year neighbor of mine, came to me on the street and asked me, I have this colleague, he's with us since elementary school, and he never had a good mark in a test. I knew this child, he had a language development problem, and then she told me, our teacher of history, in the test she made, in his test, explained the questions a bit better. And for the first time in his life, he had a good mark. What the teacher did was to understand that there was a language development problem and did paraphrasing of the questions. He knew history. He knew history. He just couldn't understand questions. And I said, okay, so what's the problem? And she said, the problem is our parents. They say that this is not fair. And I said, the problem is the parents. So I told her, okay, some of you notice I have a problem in one of my feet and I walk with a stick. And I told her, okay, you know what we are going to do? Let's do a race. Let's run until the end of the street. And she looked at me like, he's crazy, which I am. He's crazy. And I said, no, let's run, the 2 of us. And then she said, okay. Then I said, wait, who's going to win? And she said, I will. So what's the point of doing a race? And this is, when we're talking about assessment and formative assessment, this is what we need to know. It's not because I have a walking disability that I cannot walk. It just means that I have to adapt my standards and take myself to the limit of my capacity. That's what an inclusive curriculum is about, taking everyone to the limits of their capacities. Second recommendation is for us to use evidence, not opinions. This is just the covers of some of the reports we have at ISNI on preventing school failure, on relations with digital education. Let's use evidence. We live so much on the social media. We live so much on the blogs, on the newspapers, articles by alleged experts on education. Let's use data and policy recommendations. Third recommendation, and this is a tough nut to crack, cross-sectoral collaboration. I already touched on this, and this is an area in which we are trying to develop work with the ministries and with the countries. We have a child at school, and the child comes with a whole history, with his backpack full of things: housing problems, parents unemployed, poverty, delinquency in his neighborhood, a disability, a language deficit, not speaking the language. In this list that I made, there are so many things that don't depend on education. So having the states, not on paper, but in real practice, having the health, the housing, the social welfare, the justice system cooperative with education is a key dimension for the implementation of inclusive education models. Let's not be naive. This is one of the most difficult areas because we tend to work in silos. But there are good cases. There is good evidence in some countries. For instance, Denmark is a good case of cross-sectoral collaboration. In other countries, it's more difficult. Another dimension is to cross-link inclusive education with other global issues. I will give here an example of the technological advancements. As I said, they can be a source of digital divide, but they can also be a tool. I'm now, when I have free time, which doesn't happen much, but especially when I'm at airports waiting for to board, I have this new game that I do with myself. I open ChatGPT and I write a prompt like this: do a lesson plan for 50 minutes for a student with attention deficit disorder who loves dinosaurs. He has to learn simple equations, and his peers have to be working on some activity that they can develop autonomously so that I can pay attention to this student. And then, in some seconds, and the lesson plan appears. I have to review it. I have to know if it works or not. But the time I saved, so let's see how technology can help. But let's also be aware that it can be a new source for divide and for exclusion. One very important dimension, and it's one of our biggest recommendations: transform special education schools in resource centers to work with the mainstream schools. We don't need to close them down. We just need to transform their missions. And let's work on the professional development of all staff members in schools, all teachers, all non-teaching staff, so that inclusion can happen inside the school and not in segregated spaces. This is difficult as well because there are interests, lobbies sometimes. Sometimes we have to follow the money to know where the resistance is. But this is a key dimension to have the expertise, the technical expertise that exists in special schools, and make them work, transform their mission, and make them work with the mainstream school. And it's also very important, I use this expression, redesigning the grammar of school. An inclusive school is a school that works in a different manner, where the leadership is developed in a different manner. It's not a school that is a collection of subjects, mathematics, philosophy, geography. It's a school that is designed in order to welcome, to accommodate, to be flexible, to be able to revisit its program many times. Sixth and almost final recommendation: parents and family engagement. Let's work with parents. I know that there is resistance in some parent movements here and there. But we have to understand why. If I'm a parent of a child with disability, I'm not ready to wait for the system to be ready. I want a solution today. And there is anxiety, there is resistance. I've talked to parents who say, I want my child to be in an inclusive school, but I cannot find it. So I go to a special school, but I hate it. So We have to work with them. They have the best knowledge about their children. And we need positive stories. We need bad news hit the news very quickly. But there are so many positive stories. So let's learn from them and work with them. I always say that we have to capitalize the experience of preschool. Early childcare and education is many times neglected, but it's the best education level that we have. Look at what they did. When I was a child, they were already doing it. They work in project-based learning. They work integrating what happens outside the school in the classroom. They work social-emotional skills and academic skills at the same time. And the children learn, and they do not drop out of school. And then 10 years later, we are thinking of innovation in education. Let's just go back to preschool. It's the most inclusive level of education that we have. Let's replicate what they do. And we have to know that we get better policies if they are also inclusive and participatory in their design. Inclusive education cannot be designed from a cabinet, from an office in the central government. It has to engage with academics, with learners, with families, with NGOs, with everyone. Otherwise, we just get conflict and nothing will really happen. Then I go back to this topic because it's a big topic, the building of societal consensus. We need testimonies. We need to spot lighthouse examples. We need good stories. We need dialogue. And we need to learn from these historical cases of segregation, because then, the ones that I showed you at the beginning, because then we can see it's about will. It's about wanting to make the change. Very briefly, and I'm finishing, just to show you some of our ongoing work at the agency. We are currently working with the country clusters according to specific areas of interest. What we do, the core of our activity, is policy development support, but we are also an independent platform of experience sharing, because we believe that cooperation and learning from each other is key to develop inclusive educations. Being a teacher can be a very isolated profession. The more we cooperate, the more we collaborate, the more we see that things that appear to be impossible are actually possible. Our six big areas of intervention right now are on learner participation in inclusive education, on monitoring and evaluation, how to best collect data, on the participation not only of learners but also families in shaping legislation and shaping inclusive policies. On collaboration, we have two big projects on collaboration. One of them really targeting the cross-sectoral collaboration for inclusive education, and a very important project on quality assurance. We here, I don't know if you have it in Spain, but I've heard all my life that when we adapt the education system to learners with difficulties, we are downgrading the system. The word that they use in Portuguese is facilitismo. And I always say what is fácil, what is easy, is to exclude. The really difficult education system is the one that accommodates to include everyone. Just 2 or 3 thematic activities that I'd like to highlight, and on our website, and I will project the link at the end. You'll have information on this project. Voices into action, getting the participation of learners in the definition of policies. Also, projects on the financing models and on mapping the system of each country. It's one of the most visited areas in our website is the country information area that is regularly updated by the countries. Countries policy development support is a new activity in which we are sitting with the countries, collecting information on what they have, and then thinking ahead what needs to be changed in order to progressively making the difference. And we have an area of statistics that we are just changing with a new framework. And then, and I will not go through this, we have additional activities upon request from the countries. We are maybe starting one of these activities with Spain. Spain participated in one of these technical support instruments to develop more participation and to highlight the strengths and weaknesses of the system so that we could make recommendations for priority actions. All in all, I would like to end as I started. If we want inclusion, it's because we want democracy. It's because we want a different model of society where everyone belongs, where everyone is equal because it's different and because diversity is the rule. So let's put on the glasses, let's hold hands, let's not take this as a dream, because it is possible, it happens, it has happened, and if we work together, we can make it happen even more rapidly and even more effectively. Thank you for your attention.
Muchas gracias, Joao. Pues vamos a proceder al acto ya de clausura del Congreso y le vamos a pedir que suban a la mesa a la Vicerectora de Inclusión, Igualdad y Responsabilidad Social de la Universidad de Granada, Mar Venegas, y al Director General de la Fundación 11, a José Luis Martínez Donoso. Por favor, subir a la mesa. Muchas gracias. No, perfecto. Aguantar aquí hasta al final en este intenso congreso que hemos tenido de 2 días y medio. Muchas gracias a todos y a todas por estar aquí con nosotros aún. Espero que estéis todos bien y que nos vayamos aún mejor. Pues como viene siendo habitual en este congreso, solemos hacer un manifiesto que, además de ser una declaración de intenciones, como todos los manifiestos, es también una llamada a la acción. Y en este caso, pues el manifiesto lo va a leer Domingo Martínez y Azahara Naranjo, 2 miembros de la red SALDU, a los que aprovechamos también la oportunidad para agradecer el excelente trabajo que hacéis dentro de las universidades españolas. Gracias a la red y gracias a Domingo y Azahara, que van a hacer lectura de ese manifiesto.
Manifiesto del VII Congreso Internacional Universidad y Discapacidad, en Granada, 21 de noviembre de 2025. Recordando que la educación es un derecho humano fundamental, consagrado en la Declaración Universal de Derechos Humanos, la Convención sobre los Derechos de las Personas con Discapacidad y reafirmado por la Agenda 2030 de Naciones Unidas. Reconociendo que la UNESCO y Naciones Unidas establecen que el derecho a la educación implica garantizar la inclusión, la equidad e igualdad de oportunidades y la eliminación de todas las barreras que impiden el acceso, la participación, la permanencia y el progreso académico de cualquier persona, sin distinción alguna. Perdón. Asumiendo los compromisos internacionales y nacionales, especialmente la Agenda 2030 en sus objetivos 4, 8 y 10, la Declaración de Fortaleza y el Marco de Acción Educación 2030, que sitúan la inclusión y la equidad como pilares de una educación de calidad para todas las personas, asumiendo los objetivos de la Estrategia Europea sobre los derechos de las personas con discapacidad 2021-2030 y la garantía de su plena participación mediante la igualdad de oportunidades y no discriminación, y la inclusión a través del aprendizaje permanente y la participación en el mercado laboral.
Asumiendo el Programa Iberoamericano de Discapacidad y los Objetivos Estratégicos 3 y 4 para garantizar el acceso y mejora de las trayectorias educativas de las personas con discapacidad y promover el ejercicio de sus derechos laborales. Considerando la entrada en vigor de la Ley Orgánica 2023 del Sistema Universitario LOSU, que refuerza la obligación de las universidades de garantizar la accesibilidad, la igualdad de oportunidades y la acción positiva para el estudiantado y el personal con discapacidad, así como la adecuación de estructuras curriculares, el diseño universal para el aprendizaje y la promoción de estudios propios para personas con discapacidad intelectual. Reconociendo la creciente participación de la Universidad Iberoamericana en el Congreso y, en concreto, la celebración de 3 eventos subregionales preparatorios del mismo, que han dejado un mapa de la vivencia de la discapacidad en las instituciones de educación superior de Iberoamérica y evidencia de la voluntad de articular esfuerzos a nivel regional, manifestamos.
1. La educación inclusiva es y debe entenderse como un proceso transformador que beneficia a toda la sociedad, mejorando los resultados académicos, personales y sociales y promoviendo la cohesión y la justicia social. 2. Las universidades deben asumir un compromiso institucional y social profundo con la inclusión, garantizando la participación plena de toda la comunidad universitaria y especialmente del estudiantado, favoreciendo el bienestar psicológico y socioemocional como parte de su cultura y política universitaria. 3. La inclusión requiere actualización de normativa, recursos económicos suficientes, innovación docente y tecnológica, metodologías accesibles, entornos universales de aprendizaje, evaluaciones equitativas, promover la autonomía como principio educativo y la implicación activa de toda la comunidad universitaria. 4. La certificación de calidad universitaria debe incorporar indicadores de equidad, inclusión y accesibilidad, promoviendo sellos y reconocimientos específicos para universidades y prácticas docentes inclusivas. 5. La transformación digital y los nuevos modelos de enseñanza deben garantizar la accesibilidad tecnológica, el diseño universal para el aprendizaje, el DUA, y la participación, evitando la brecha digital y la exclusión. La educación superior inclusiva debe asumir la accesibilidad digital y tecnológica como un derecho educativo de nueva generación. Se requiere la creación de un marco europeo y nacional de accesibilidad digital universitaria que garantice la interoperabilidad de plataformas, materiales y servicios en línea, con el fin de eliminar la brecha digital y promover el aprendizaje permanente de las personas con discapacidad.
6. Los desafíos y dilemas que genera el empleo de herramientas de inteligencia artificial en el proceso formativo y en la gestión deben ser afrontados con valentía por las universidades, promoviendo un uso ético, responsable e inclusivo. 7. El cumplimiento de la Ley Orgánica del Sistema Universitario Español, LOSU, exige mecanismos de vigilancia y desarrollo normativo para asegurar la aplicación efectiva de sus artículos sobre equidad, inclusión, accesibilidad y acción positiva, especialmente el artículo 37. 8. Las universidades deben adoptar medidas de acción positiva y ajustes razonables, tanto curriculares, metodológicos y organizativos, para garantizar la igualdad de oportunidades en el acceso, permanencia, progreso y egreso del estudiantado con discapacidad. 9. La responsabilidad social universitaria debe tener un enfoque inclusivo e interseccional, prestando especial atención a todos los grupos o personas vulnerables de la población estudiantil por razones de discapacidad, sexo, estado de salud, procedencia, personas en entornos rurales, discapacidad intelectual, comunidad LGTBIQ+, estudiantes en situación de pobreza y otros grupos diversos con circunstancias de vulnerabilidad o desventaja múltiple. 10. El acceso a estudios universitarios debe ser activamente promovido para personas con discapacidad intelectual y del desarrollo, mediante estudios ajustados a sus capacidades y apoyos específicos. Esto permitirá abrir las puertas de la universidad a quienes históricamente han estado excluidos de ella, garantizando el derecho a aprender a lo largo de toda la vida.
11. La presencia y participación de personas con discapacidad y otros grupos en desventaja debe ser garantizada y valorada en todos los ámbitos universitarios, incluyendo el acceso a puestos de personal docente e investigador con los apoyos y medidas de acción positiva que las normas establecen. Las universidades deberán aplicar las acciones positivas de manera realista para garantizar el acceso y evitar dejar sin efecto las cuotas de reserva. 12. Las universidades, en colaboración con las organizaciones representativas de las personas con discapacidad, deben desarrollar sistemas permanentes de mentoría inclusiva, mediante los cuales estudiantes, egresados y profesionales con discapacidad puedan acompañar a otros estudiantes durante su trayectoria académica. Este acompañamiento debe entenderse como una herramienta pedagógica y social que refuerce la motivación, reduzca el abandono y promueva redes de apoyo entre pares. 13. La innovación docente y la formación del profesorado y personal de administración, gestión y servicios deben ser imprescindibles, continuas y reforzadas en materia de inclusión con perspectiva de interseccionalidad. Estas prácticas deben ser compartidas y difundidas. 14. La investigación universitaria debe apostar por el estudio y desarrollo de prácticas inclusivas para la equidad, favoreciendo el tránsito del estudiantado egresado hacia empleo de calidad y la transferencia de conocimiento a la sociedad. 15. La ciencia debe ser inclusiva en su diseño y promover la participación de las personas con discapacidad. Las universidades deben garantizar el acceso de las personas con discapacidad a la carrera académica e investigadora con los mecanismos de reserva y acción positiva que las leyes establezcan.
16. La inclusión debe ser el paradigma que impregne toda la actividad universitaria, conectada con la sociedad y debe ser contemplada no solo en la actividad docente, sino en todas las actividades científicas, culturales, de participación, incidencia y transferencia. Por ello, la accesibilidad debe impregnar toda la vida universitaria, desde la gestión, el asociacionismo, a la cultura y/o el deporte. 17. La colaboración y las redes entre universidades, sociedad civil, tejido empresarial, empleadores, personal científico y personas expertas son esenciales para desarrollar herramientas, sinergias y estrategias comunes que fortalezcan la inclusión y la equidad. 18. La necesidad de intensificar la cooperación con las universidades iberoamericanas para que avancen en la inclusión, considerando el progreso ya realizado y sus contextos, retos y oportunidades particulares. 19. El compromiso con la Agenda 2030 implica avanzar hacia modelos universitarios inclusivos, garantizando el derecho a una educación inclusiva y de calidad a lo largo de la vida y reforzando la educación como bien público y universal. Recomendamos que todas las universidades, administraciones y agentes sociales reconozcan y potencien el papel transformador de la educación inclusiva en la construcción de sociedades más justas, equitativas y cohesionadas. La universidad debe seguir siendo el principal motor de cambio social, promoviendo la diversidad, la equidad y la inclusión como valores fundamentales y asegurando el progreso de todo el mundo, especialmente de quienes enfrentan múltiples factores de desventaja. Por todo ello, las universidades deben, desde su autonomía organizativa y con el apoyo de la sociedad y las distintas administraciones, crear oportunidades de desarrollo reales, identificar y suprimir todas las barreras a la participación y el aprendizaje y promover la creación de entornos más representativos y justos.
Domingo. Muchísimas gracias a Domingo, Azahara. Bueno, pues también como viene siendo habitual en estos congresos ya vamos a hacer ahora un reconocimiento, no a lo mejor póster y a la mejor comunicación, porque eso exigiría un trabajo imposible, porque hemos tenido excelentes comunicaciones y excelentes póster, pero sí dar un pequeño reconocimiento a algunas que nos ha parecido interesante destacar. Y en la categoría de comunicación queremos darle esta distinción a Paulina Sanzana Müller, que creo que está aquí en el auditorio. Ella nos ha presentado una comunicación titulada Historias de vida de inclusión en la educación superior, experiencias de estudiantes con discapacidades en carreras del área STEM en una universidad chilena. Ella es miembro de la Universidad Austral de Chile. Paulina, le va a entregar la comunicación José Luis Martínez Donoso, el director general de la Fundación 11. Paulina, si quieres acercarte por allí. Muchas gracias, enhorabuena, Paulina, y espero que disfrutes esa estancia de fin de semana en los hoteles Union que acabamos de entregarte. Y vamos a dar otro reconocimiento que espero que está en la sala y si no lo recogerá, que está aquí la directora de Inclusión para hacérselo llegar, a Paola Sánchez Moreno. Se le hemos querido dar el reconocimiento a un póster que ha presentado el equipo de la Universidad de Granada llamado Diversidad. Es una experiencia, un proyecto que han puesto en marcha un grupo de profesores, y aquí está, un grupo de profesores, PDI y personal de la comunidad universitaria en esta universidad, una asociación, han creado una asociación desde la que pretenden dar apoyos desde recursos, investigaciones y todo tipo de apoyos integrales al alumnado con necesidades de apoyo educativo. Enhorabuena por la experiencia, Paola, mucho éxito, y te vamos a hacer entrega de ese reconocimiento a la vicerrectora de la Universidad de Granada. Muchas gracias, enhorabuena, Paola, y suerte con la asociación. Y antes de dar ya paso a las palabras de nuestro director general y la vicerrectora Mar Venegas, vamos a ver un vídeo resumen de lo que han sido estos 2 días y medio intensos de congreso.
Mutea.
Granada se ha convertido en el lugar donde cientos de voces, ideas y experiencias se han unido para imaginar y seguir construyendo una universidad verdaderamente inclusiva. Un espacio donde la educación superior ha abierto sus puertas para escuchar, aprender y transformar, pero también para compartir lo que ya se está haciendo y lo que ya está cambiando realidades en los campus de hoy. El 7º Congreso Internacional Universidad y Discapacidad de Fundación 11 ha reunido 120 comunicaciones científicas seleccionadas entre más de 220 propuestas. Investigaciones que emocionan, proyectos que transforman vidas y modelos reales de éxito que demuestran que la inclusión no es solo un horizonte, sino un camino que ya se está recorriendo. Nos hemos unido en la Escuela Técnica Superior de Caminos, Canales y Puertos de la Universidad de Granada a más de 400 congresistas, 75 ponentes y representantes de 25 nacionalidades, incluidos 16 países iberoamericanos, para analizar los grandes retos de la universidad inclusiva, pero también para reconocer los avances que ya se han logrado. Durante 3 días, el Congreso ha ofrecido conferencias magistrales, mesas redondas, diálogos, talleres y espacios de encuentro donde se han abordado temas clave para la educación inclusiva, como la accesibilidad digital, la innovación docente, la empleabilidad, la investigación inclusiva y el diseño universal del aprendizaje. Un programa que ha permitido compartir buenas prácticas y fortalecer iniciativas que están transformando la educación superior. La juventud ha ocupado un papel esencial. Jóvenes con discapacidad que han liderado debates, defendido sus derechos y participado en la redacción del manifiesto final del Congreso, impulsando la creación de un grupo de referencia en juventud y discapacidad que ya comienza a aportar una nueva mirada al ámbito social, académico y laboral. Este Congreso se ha consolidado un año más como un espacio imprescindible entre universidades, administraciones públicas, empresas, organizaciones de personas con discapacidad, entidades del tercer sector y jóvenes con discapacidad. Un foro donde las buenas prácticas se comparten, se amplifican y se transforman en nuevas oportunidades. Y este camino no sería posible sin la colaboración de quienes también creen en una universidad más equitativa: Fundación Universia, Accenture, Acciona, Samsung y McGraw-Hill, cuyo apoyo impulsa proyectos que acercan la innovación, la accesibilidad y el talento con discapacidad a las aulas y el mundo empresarial. La cofinanciación de la Unión Europea, a través de Inserta Empleo, ha hecho posible el desarrollo del Congreso, un respaldo que refuerza el compromiso con una educación superior diversa, justa y transformadora, para garantizar que todas las personas puedan acceder a la formación y así a la participación plena en la sociedad a través del empleo.
Estupendo. Para los que no veis, como no se ha podido audiodescribir aún, bueno, pues han sido imágenes de las diversas mesas, ponencias y actividades que hemos tenido a lo largo del Congreso. Pues ya sí que para finalizar vamos a dar la palabra a la Vicerectora de Igualdad, Inclusión y Compromiso Social de la Universidad de Granada, a Mar Venegas, a quien agradecemos nuevamente ese apoyo desde la Universidad desde el primer día. Gracias, Mar, cuando quieras.
Pues muchísimas gracias a ti, Isabel. Y la verdad es que es, y después del vídeo, más emotivo aún, tener el enorme placer no solamente de haberos acogido, sino de estar en este momento final de clausura, con esta sala todavía muy llena y con toda esa información, toda esa experiencia, todo ese conocimiento, todas esas emociones que nos ha transmitido este vídeo, que recoge en síntesis lo que han sido 2 días completos, una tarde, un día completo y una mañana completa. Muchísimas gracias a la Fundación 11, José Luis, por supuesto Isabel, que ha sido pues nuestro contacto desde el principio, y a todas las personas, no solamente de la Fundación 11, sino de todas las entidades que han estado también alrededor, han hecho posible este magnífico congreso, que desde ya os digo que ha sido un poco el feedback que nos ha llegado, ha sido maravilloso, y para todas las personas, muchas, más de 400, que han pasado por aquí estos días, todo ese aprendizaje, me decía ahora María Ángeles, ¿no? la directora del secretariado para la Inclusión, que se queda con un montón de ideas para que desde el vicerrectorado podamos trabajar. Por supuesto, muchas gracias también a la Escuela de Caminos, que nos acoge y que se queda con esta infraestructura accesible que vamos a poder seguir compartiendo con todas las personas que tengan la necesidad de hacer uso en este espacio, que, como ya veis, quienes no conocíais Granada, en el corazón muy cerquita del casco antiguo, en el corazón de la universidad, en su zona, en uno de sus campus en la ciudad de Granada, porque sabéis que los campus de Ceuta y Melilla son también Universidad de Granada. Y bueno, pues que estoy segura de que habéis disfrutado también muchísimo de la ciudad, así que muchísimas gracias por acercaros desde tantos países a esta ciudad que históricamente es una ciudad diversa y que hoy pues hace gala también, ¿no?, de esa diversidad. Yo creo que, y enhorabuena, Joao, porque ha sido una magnífica conferencia de clausura. Yo creo que en esa conferencia, como han sido todas las intervenciones que han tenido lugar a lo largo de estos días, sentando cuáles son las bases y los desafíos, pero sobre todo esos principios, que son los principios de lo que debe de ser una sociedad no solamente inclusiva, una sociedad que apueste por la diversidad y por la inclusión. Me quedo con palabras tan relevantes y especialmente a día de hoy como son la igualdad, la diversidad, la plena inclusión, el concepto de equidad, que es un concepto un pasito más, un poquito más redistributivo de esa idea de igualdad. Por supuesto, con el telón de fondo de la democracia y los derechos humanos y, desde luego, en torno al concepto que para mí es fundamental y que se nos olvida. A veces se nos olvida el concepto de ciudadanía y qué significa en estados democráticos de derecho, y si puede ser estados sociales, democráticos y de derecho, el ser ciudadano y ciudadana. Creo que eso es una cuestión fundamental y un término que se nos olvida también a menudo y que ha aparecido en el manifiesto como el de justicia social. Yo creo que tenemos que reivindicar con ahínco, además, ese concepto de justicia social. Me quedo también, pues, por ejemplo, con otro término que escuchábamos también en el manifiesto, como es el impulsar, y en este caso asumiendo la parte que nos toca a las universidades, el papel transformador para toda la sociedad. Me gusta muchísimo, mi directora del secretariado lo dice siempre y Joao lo ha explicado magníficamente bien. Una sociedad que apuesta por las personas con alguna discapacidad es una sociedad que reconoce que todas las personas somos diversas y todas las personas tenemos alguna necesidad específica y que es, por tanto, una sociedad inclusiva para todas las personas, no solamente para las personas con alguna discapacidad. Me quedo con conceptos también como esa necesidad del pensamiento crítico, especialmente en la sociedad digital que vivimos, donde tenemos el enorme riesgo de perder la creatividad, la esencia de las personas como seres sociales, como seres sociales en el sentido también de la interacción, de cómo nos construimos socialmente en contacto unas personas con otras, desde ese núcleo central que es la diversidad, con ideas como el sentido de pertenencia, la necesidad de apostar por el bienestar de todas las personas desde un enfoque interseccional. Yo creo que ha quedado también muy bien reflejado tanto en la conferencia de clausura como en el manifiesto, o el concepto de autonomía personal, que es tan importante y que es una apuesta desde el enfoque inclusivo. Y con todo este marco teórico, con todo este telón de fondo de principios que debemos de pelear cada día, porque probablemente hemos corrido, y sobre todo creo en Europa, y ahí Joao lo podrá explicar mejor desde ese enfoque, desde la Agencia Europea, hemos pensado que todos estos derechos ya se han conseguido y son inamovibles y son un logro que hay que hacer cada día. No son un estado, son un proceso. Y ese proceso implica una lucha colectiva, continua, y, por supuesto, las universidades debemos de estar ahí. Termino con esta última cuestión, haciendo ya propio esta apuesta de tendencias y desafíos para una universidad inclusiva, que es el lema de esta 7ª edición del Congreso Internacional Universidad y Discapacidad de la Fundación 11. Tenemos ese marco de fondo, sabemos muy bien hacia dónde tenemos que ir. En la mesa inaugural se hizo especial hincapié en cuál es el papel de las universidades como educadoras y como generadoras de conocimiento, un conocimiento que debe no solo ser democrático, sino democratizarse. Y en el caso nuestro, pues de las personas que tenemos competencias en materia de inclusión, de diversidad e inclusión, pues especialmente teniendo en cuenta hoy que además no solamente es una apuesta social, sino que es un mandato legal para las universidades, y también se ha dicho estos días las diferentes leyes que son nuestro marco de referencia. Para mí, que vengo también de la sociología de la educación, ese cambio que hubo a mitad de la primera década del siglo XXI, el pasar de hablar de necesidades educativas especiales a necesidades específicas de apoyo educativo, yo creo que fue un antes y un después en dónde ponemos el foco. Cuando abordamos la discapacidad, cuando abordamos esa diversidad funcional, que yo sé que a algunas personas es un término que no les gusta, pero que en cualquier caso es poner el foco en las capacidades múltiples de todas las personas, en lo que todas las personas podemos aportar y en lo que la sociedad tiene que adaptar para que todas las personas puedan desarrollar ese potencial. En el caso nuestro de la Universidad de Granada, como os decía el miércoles, recogemos todo este aprendizaje que hemos tenido la ocasión de poder disfrutar durante estos días para incorporarlo en lo que será nuestro segundo plan de accesibilidad universal e inclusión social y también en nuestras medidas de acción positiva, que se decía ahora también, en nuestra comisión de medidas de acción positiva, que es una forma también de adaptar no solamente al estudiantado, que es muy importante en las universidades porque es el colectivo mayoritario, sino también a todo el personal, a todas las personas que trabajamos, que somos el personal que trabajamos en la universidad. Y muchísimas gracias de nuevo, muchísimas gracias, José Luis, a través tuya, a toda la Fundación 11. Muchísimas gracias, Isabel, Joao. Muchísimas gracias, María Ángeles y Laura. Y muchísimas gracias a todas las entidades y a todas las personas que hacéis posible cada día que esto sea una realidad y nos empujáis a las instituciones para que vayamos también en esa dirección. Y aquí tenéis en la Universidad de Granada vuestra casa cuando queráis.
Muchas gracias, Mar. Pues ahora sí, ya que para terminar nos va a dirigir unas palabras José Luis Martínez Donoso, el director general de la Fundación 11. Gracias, José Luis, por estar aquí.
Saludos a todas y a todos, buenos días. Bueno, ya casi es la hora. Como pasan las clausuras, siempre suelen ser al mediodía, entonces siempre acumula retraso. En este momento yo creo que vamos bien, pero así todo me voy a ceñir al guión que tenía preparado y así no me salgo del tiempo. Querida Vicerectora, querida Mar, llegamos al final, a la conclusión de este 7º Congreso Internacional sobre Universidad y Discapacidad que hemos organizado desde la Fundación 11 junto a la Universidad de Granada. Quiero dar las gracias a Inserta Empleo, también al Fondo Social Europeo, así como a empresas colaboradoras que ya han salido en el vídeo, Accenture, Acciona, Universia, Samsung y McGraw Hill. No solo porque han contribuido a que este congreso se pueda llevar adelante, sino por su presencia y su participación en mesas y en talleres. Ha sido ese acercamiento que siempre buscamos ambas partes, universidad y empresa, y es muy importante para el alumnado. Ha sido casi un año de organización donde podéis entender, ¿no?, que las situaciones de estrés se producen durante la misma, pero sí os he de decir que la pasión y el corazón puesto y el entusiasmo puesto por nuestra parte ha sido durante un año muy intenso para poder llegar a este congreso. Damos las gracias a todos los equipos, lógicamente, de la Fundación 11, en este caso, en primer lugar, a la Dirección de Universidades y a todo su equipo, a las personas de Inserta que han contribuido en estar presente en los talleres y también en la financiación de este congreso, así como a las direcciones o departamentos de comunicación, tanto de Inserta como de la propia Fundación 11. Yo creo que las gracias más importantes deben ser también a las inteligencias compartidas, ¿no?, por la honestidad de los debates, que aquí me han comentado cómo han ido, y que se han puesto encima de la mesa sin ningún tipo de tapujos, con una valentía de señalar aquello que todavía no funciona. Se han hecho muchas cosas, pero somos conscientes que todavía queda mucho por hacer. Todas las cosas de la vida se hacen con una convicción y compromiso, y si se hacen así, estas cosas salen bien. Y ya sé que es falsa modestia, pero este es el caso del Congreso, ¿no?, donde todos los actores, todos, desde la Fundación 11, la Universidad de Granada, pero también los participantes y los colaboradores han estado en esa convicción, han puesto corazón en ello. Mirad, hace un par de horas me decía una arquitecta que estamos preparando para la apertura de un centro por talento digital en Barcelona y me mandaba un diseño de unas sillas y en las sillas decía: José Luis, sé que tiene muchos corazones, pero es la forma de trabajar que tiene la Fundación 11. Trasladémosla a la sociedad y eso es lo que ha pasado en este congreso. Ha habido esa magia de la convicción y de trabajar con corazón. Me consta que los días y las horas han sido cortas porque es verdad que la profundidad de los temas así nos ha llevado, pero también es cierto que hemos ampliado con respecto a otros congresos pues un poquito más el tiempo y poder ofrecer un programa completo, no solo completo en las jornadas que aquí se han celebrado, sino también de enseñar y poder ver y disfrutar de esta magnífica ciudad como es Granada y de los monumentos y su gente que aquí se albergan. Afortunadamente, en este congreso lo confirma, contamos cada día con más profesionales, personal de administración y servicios del profesorado. Ayer tenía yo la oportunidad de hablar con algunos y efectivamente están muy entregados a cómo se debe trabajar en la inclusión de las personas, cómo se debe trabajar en la normalización de la universidad y, por lo tanto, son conscientes de las necesidades de apoyo que se tienen y, lógicamente, en ellos están trabajando de forma continua. En este congreso hemos contado con una participación muy amplia y diversa de jóvenes universitarios con discapacidad, donde han sido protagonistas y queremos que cada vez lo sean más. Y han hablado en primera persona de cómo se encuentran en la universidad, de sus dificultades y también, ¿por qué no?, hablar de una muestra ejemplar de su talento. Nos lo han puesto encima de la mesa. Hay talento. La discapacidad tenemos la misma parte alícuota del talento que tiene la sociedad. No pueden excluirnos porque se estarían dejando fuera un porcentaje de ese talento. En este congreso hemos visto también que la discapacidad y los desafíos van cambiando. Lógicamente, hay discapacidades emergentes. Luego haré alguna mención a alguna de ellas. Y también los entornos. Y tenemos que ser capaces de adaptarlos para poder dar soluciones. Empezamos en la universidad eliminando barreras físicas y también mentales. Las mentales todavía seguimos trabajando en ellas. Las físicas vamos avanzando. Pero han venido de nuevo las digitales, las tecnológicas, donde dejan fuera mucha gente y tenemos que estar ahí. Puede ser nuestro vehículo. Se habla de inteligencia artificial. La inteligencia artificial es el vehículo más capacitante para la discapacidad, pero también puede ser el vehículo que nos dé un sesgo, que los algoritmos nos dejen fuera y también puede ser un sesgo para que la discapacidad se quede, como digo, fuera de la misma. Por eso tenemos que ofrecer a la discapacidad itinerarios diferentes. También tienen derecho a vivir una experiencia universitaria y formar parte de ellos la discapacidad intelectual. Nuestros programas de universidad, que son muy conocidos, cientos de alumnos con discapacidad intelectual acuden a la universidad, más de 30 universidades ya están en estos programas, nos vienen a mostrar que cuando se puso en marcha hace 10 años, esto fue todo un éxito por parte de Fundación y que llaman a nuestra puerta más universidades. Y nosotros estamos en la búsqueda de recursos. aunque los recorridos sean diferentes. Cada uno de nosotros tenemos un recorrido diferente y cada uno de nosotros necesitaremos los apoyos adecuados para poder conseguir. Me gustaría y nos gustaría, en todo caso, que nos fuéramos de Granada con 3 ideas muy claras. Tenemos un marco sólido de referencia. Aquí se ha anunciado, tenemos tratados internacionales, leyes nacionales, estrategias europeas, iberoamericanas y un largo etcétera. Y el propio manifiesto que hoy aquí se ha leído. Tenemos conocimiento y experiencia acumulada en estos años. En estos días hemos venido a potenciarlas y, por lo tanto, hemos escuchado testimonios, investigaciones inspiradoras y también dificultades muy concretas que nos llevamos como deberes y nos partimos todos, no de cero, sino que partimos con un bagaje. Y la última, lo que necesitamos ahora es ritmo, concreción y corresponsabilidad. Ritmo para que no se duerman los compromisos, concreción. Concreción para saber qué haremos mañana mismo y corresponsabilidad porque ninguna universidad, ninguna administración, ninguna organización puede hacerlo sola. Se necesita que todos estemos juntos. Y permitidme terminar con una invitación muy sencilla. Sé que saldréis emocionados porque habéis tenido un buen congreso, una buena ciudad, una buena gente, unos buenos monumentos, pero en muchos casos siempre nos vamos muy sensibleros cuando nos tocan la fibra. Pero yo os haría una reflexión. ¿Cuál va a ser mi pequeña o gran acción de aquí al próximo congreso que será en 2027? Puede ser promover una comisión de inclusión donde no existía, puede ser revisar una guía docente, puede ser acompañar a un estudiante que está a punto de abandonar, puede ser impulsar un proyecto de accesibilidad digital, puede ser abrir una puerta al empleo donde hay hoy un gran muro. Si cada uno y cada una de nosotros hacemos algo concreto, cuando volvamos a encontrarnos en el siguiente congreso, diremos que nos fuimos con la cabeza muy alta del 7º Congreso y que no solo fue un evento, sino que fue un punto de inflexión. Desde Fundación 11 vamos a seguir trabajando para que eso sea así. Vamos a trabajar para ese 8º Congreso, que, por cierto, ya tenemos muchas peticiones donde celebrarse. Eso es bueno porque significa que los que han estado aquí, Vicerectora, han estado cómodos, han estado a gusto, han aprendido, han enseñado. Y eso significa que vamos por la buena senda. Haremos un concurso para ver quién se lleva el siguiente congreso. Gracias por las peticiones. Me piden que prevarique por mi tierra, no lo haré. Tendré que hacer los méritos necesarios, pero también he de decir que gracias a todas las universidades hoy podemos estar aquí. Feliz jornada, feliz congreso y feliz regreso a casa. Muchísimas gracias.
Sí, atención. Las entradas para la visita a la Alhambra se recogen en la planta -2. El bus de la visita de las 16:30 sale a las 15 horas desde el hall de Caminos.